Good morning, everybody. We are still factoring trinomial expressions, and today in this module what our job is to do is we are to factor what I call a difficult trinomial. Now, a difficult trinomial means the leading coefficient will not be the number 1, and that's going to make things a little bit more complicated. It's doable, you're just going to have to think a little bit more. Now, what happens is what we saw in the previous module is if we have a trinomial, 3 terms, and the leading coefficient is not the number 1, we would hope we could pull it out by doing the GCF rule. But by doing the GCF rule, that means you would have to divide every term by that value, and that's not always the case. Now, if we have a difficult trinomial and we cannot use the GCF rule to get that leading coefficient out, then we have 2 options on how to factor. There is something that's called backwards FOIL, trial by error, and there's a procedure called the AC method. So I'm going to show you both ways to factor a difficult trinomial, and then you're going to have to choose the way you prefer, and then just practice that way over and over and over again. So the first way, the way I was taught to factor a difficult trinomial, was to use my brain. I use backwards FOIL, and it's by trial and error. So let me look at the example in our PowerPoint. I have 3x squared minus 4x minus 7. That's my expression. It has 3 terms, so we know it is a trinomial. Now, my first gut reaction is to say, oh my, the x squared has a 3 in front of it. That's going to make things a little bit more difficult. It would be great if we could get that 3 out of there by dividing every term by 3 by doing the GCF rule. But ladies and gentlemen, can we divide every term by 3? No. We can't divide 4x by 3, and we surely cannot divide the number -7 by 3. So we're stuck with that coefficient of 3. Now, I think of this method, backwards FOIL, just like we've been doing with the easy trinomials. I know when I factor a trinomial, you always put 2 sets of parentheses, and I always write above it FOIL. Okay, so I write that above my terms. So who is our first term? It's 3x squared. So again, just like I was doing in the previous modules, I say to myself, what can I multiply in algebra to make 3x squared? Well, we know x squared is x times x. So to have 3x squared, you would have to multiply a 3x times a 1x. And that's my only option that can go first. So I'm actually going to put that inside my parentheses. So inside my first parentheses, I'll have my 3x. And inside my second parentheses, I'll have my x. Okay. After I go to the first term, I'm supposed to go to the last term. My last term is 7. Remember, don't look at the sign yet, just look at the number. What are the factors of 7? Well, this is great. 7's prime, so my only option for 7 is 1 and 7. Now, here's the catch. I know, and you know, 1 and 7 is never going to subtract to make that middle term -4. But here's where the problem lies. We no longer just have an x and an x. We have a 3x and a 1x, and that 3 in front of our x in our first parentheses is going to change it up. So I call this trial and error. I know for my constant, I have to use the factors 1 and 7. They're going to have to go in the parentheses. The placement of them is important. So if you look at your notes, the first time I wrote this out, I put with my 3x the number 1, and I put with my regular 1x the number 7. And it makes sense. If I multiply 3x times x, the first terms, I'll get 3x squared. And if I multiply 1 times 7, the last terms, I will get the 7. Now, I know I need to subtract to get the -4x. So the way we're going to figure out if we have all our terms in the right spot when we factor is we're going to have to check your inners and outers. Remember, your inners is the little man's nose, and the outers is his mouth. So if you go along with me, if we do our inners, 1 times x is 1x. And if we do our outers, 3x times 7 is 21x. If you take a 1x and a 21x and subtract it, would you get the middle term in the trinomial, the -4x? Heck no. 21x and 1x, if you subtract it, makes 20x. What that tells me is I put my constants 1 and 7 in the wrong set of parentheses. So now I'm going to switch them. I'm going to leave the 3x in the first parentheses. I'm going to leave the x in the second parentheses. But now with the 3x, I'm going to put the 7, And now with the 1x, I'm going to put the 1. And I'm going to check my inners and outers again. So now, in my next set of parentheses, if I check my inners, I have 7 times x, which is 7x, my nose. I have on the outers 3x times 1, my mouth, which is 3x. If I take a 7x and a 3x and subtract it, would I make that middle term 4x? Yay, I will. So that's the method trial by error. Now, once I get all my terms in the right spot, now I still got to get my signs. So we've talked about this. When you factor a trinomial, you have to listen to the expression. I want to subtract to make that middle term negative 4x. Subtract means the signs have to be different. I need a positive and a negative. And to make a negative 4x, I want the bigger term negative. So the bigger term would have been the 7x. So the 7 gets the negative. The other term, the 3x, would have to be positive. So that means the 1 would get the positive. So when I factor that difficult trinomial, I get the expression 3x minus 7 times x plus 1. So it's exactly like we've been doing for the easy trinomials. The only difference is getting the location of the constants. Now it's going to matter where you put those constants at the end in that last spot. And you're going to have to check by doing the inners and the outers and making sure they make the middle term. All right, let's hit the whiteboard and try another example. See you then.